welcome to What If I Say Yes? How are you today?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be part of your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Okay, so let's begin with you telling my audience, who are you?
Well, there's a loaded question, right? I am a daughter. I'm a sister. I'm a wife. I'm a mother of 3 kids. I am a recreational therapist by trade. And I'm an educator in many of my roles, my professional roles.
Okay. And now tell the audience how we know each other.
Well, we have the pleasure of being brought together through our children, which is the way I know so many great people in Ithaca. Your daughter Maya and my daughter Sadie, I think met in 6th grade, and I feel like they came together through classes, but also through a musical that they were in. So that was fun, and yeah, so.
I remember there was a play date or something. I had to drop Maya off at your home. And then so we said hello very quickly, but when I went to pick Maya up, we were in the back and you were showing me something that you wanted to do with tiles. So now I'm very curious to find out if you finished that project.
Yes, that project is partially finished. We got a great start to it. We were making a mosaic on a retaining wall that we had built out of cinder blocks that were not very attractive. So we try to reuse and repurpose materials to save money and not add more to the environment. So we had a lot of beautiful plates and cracked mugs and tiles that people had that we had collected and people had given to us. So yeah, we created a beautiful rainbow mosaic on one of the walls, and we're working on 2 more. So, and it's been a fun creative project for the whole family to get involved with. And I remember when you picked Maya up, we got to talking, and you probably stayed an hour, and it was really fun to get to know you. And I think Maya was happy to have a little more time on the trampoline.
Yes. She's into gymnastics, so whatever she can jump and do flips and turn around and do something, she's very happy. Yes. Okay, Molly. So once we've established all this, let's jump right into the main question of this space. When was a moment in your life when you asked the question, what if I say yes? You then said yes, and you did something.
Well, yeah, one of the examples that rises to the top for me is when I was 24 and I had just met my now husband, David, and we were working together at a rehabilitation center and school for kids with multiple disabilities in New Hampshire. And he had just started there, and we came together pretty quickly. And one of the things he said to me really early on in our relationship, our dating, was he said, I've always wanted to do the Peace Corps. And it's something that he had pursued right after he graduated with his undergrad, and his advisor said, Peace Corps will be there. Wait until you go on and get your master's, because that's something he needed for his field. And so it had been something he'd been thinking about for a long time, and I had actually not thought of at all. But he said, now is the time in my life. I really feel like I want to do this, and would you consider doing this with me? And so that was a time where I didn't really actually have to contemplate that long. It really fit in with who I was, and I enjoy change. I enjoy adventure. We didn't have any thing really holding us back or tying us down. And so I said, yes, I would love to do that together. And so we began the process of applying. Yeah. And in that process, we realized that we actually had to be married to do it as a couple. They do not allow people who are just in relationships because they don't want you to get there and find, your relationship isn't working out, and, that's going to affect your Peace Corps commitment and service. So not only do you need to be married, you had to have been living together for at least a year before you go, because again, they want to make sure you're compatible and not finding out that you can't live together when you're in another country. So that was the impetus actually for us to get married. We said,
oh my goodness,
let's do it. We got married and we had been living together for a while, and we started the application process, and the process to apply back then in 2000 was a full year. A full
year to apply?
Yeah, the whole process, the application process took a year. Mm-hmm.
Before we go into detail, explain what the Peace Corps is for people outside this country, or for people who are not familiar with it.
Sure. So it's a governmental organization that was founded in the 60s. I should know the exact date, but it's escaping me now. And President Kennedy had started it as a response to, as another way to reach out and provide support to other countries. So the program was a way for U.S. citizens to get involved in aiding and supporting other countries in need without serving in the military. So so it was a way for people to say, I want to serve my country, I want to help other countries. And so it's funded by the government, and it's a 2-year commitment. To serve in another country. The application process is probably changed a little bit since 2000 because we've got a lot more technology now, but it's a rigorous process because they want to make sure that your mental health and your physical health are stable, because many times you're serving in countries where you don't have access to good health care and you may be isolated. Many people will have to learn another language depending on where you go. So the interview process, which we did together, you have an opportunity to talk about what you're interested in, areas, work areas, countries that you might like to go, but really, ultimately, you don't have a choice. They decide and they'll offer you an appointment somewhere, and you can choose to accept it or decline. I'm not sure if you decline, how many more opportunities you have. But in our interviews, we just emphasized a couple things. One, we did not want to go to a country where, as a married couple, as a woman, I was not able to go out without David with me. And I'm pretty independent, and I just felt like that wasn't going to work for me. So that eliminated a lot of countries for us, or some placements. And then we also, David's in speech language pathology, and so we wanted to be in a country where we spoke English. So again, that narrowed it down for us. So we ended up being offered a placement in Grenada in the Eastern Caribbean, in the West Indies. It's the southernmost island in the Eastern Caribbean chain. It's just above Trinidad and Tobago and on the same latitude as Venezuela. So we were there for 2 months, 2 years. Yep, 2 years, but we were there an additional 3 months. Usually it's 3 to 6 months of training beforehand. That does not count towards your 2 years of service. And that training, the length of the training depends on where you're going and if you need to learn another language. So the training's longer if you're having language immersion. For us, it was short. It was 3 months. So.
Is that included? Is that part of the 1 year application process? So it's the 1 year to let you know whether you have a placement or not, and then you get the training?
Yeah, let's see. It was about a full year, the application process from when we applied, like submitted our initial application to when we left.
Okay.
So yeah, and then the 3 months and then our 2 years service on top of that. So.
And what is it that you did over there?
Yeah, so so Peace Corps, they'll give you your country placement and assignment of what they think you'll be doing. So I was assigned to work with the Ministry of Youth Services, and they said I was going to be working with youth, and possibly with HIV and AIDS education, because there was a large problem on the islands at that time, around, educating people with AIDS and HIV. And so that was my assignment. And then David was assigned to the Ministry of Education to work with the schools for special education on the island. So we arrived, and I actually ended up working in the Ministry of Social Services with the homes for the aged on the island. So I went from thinking I was going to be working with youth for the 2 years, and I had, sneakers and shorts and all kinds of, just clothing that I thought I'd be running. I'm a recreational therapist. So, I thought, okay, I'm going to be running team building activities and outdoor education and all that. And instead I was working with the ministry, which is very proper. People dress up, and it's a governmental organization. So that's and I was working with the nursing homes and the homes for the aged. So it was kind of the other extreme. So yeah.
Did you have to buy new clothing?
I did. And that wasn't easy on an island. And I had things sent, and a lot of people have things made and tailored. So I had some suits made, but, yeah, so I ended up, and my assignment was very vague. The reason I was placed, my assignment was switched, was because our country director, who was a local Grenadian, she had seen on my resume that I was a recreational therapist. She knew there was a shortage of any healthcare therapists, occupational, physical, speech. And so she had a mother who was in one of the homes for the aged, and knew that they just didn't have a lot of services. And so she just kind of said, great, this will be your assignment. And I didn't have any guidance on what I was supposed to be doing. So I actually spent my first, I don't know, it was probably like 2 or 3 months in the ministry, in this cubicle where the walls only came up to here. So you could look across the whole room and, see everybody. And I was right next to the printer station. And so I spent 2 months troubleshooting the printer for people and teaching myself how to type, because I never officially learned how to type. So, yeah, so, and trying to figure out who, my supervisor, there were 2 officers, they called them, for the entire island, which is just under 100,000 people. There were 2 officers that worked in the elderly, the senior portion of social services. And so the one of them would take me around and tour me to some of the homes, but he didn't have any guidance for me. He didn't, they didn't really pay too much attention to that population, unfortunately. So he wasn't like, oh, we need this or that. It was kind of like, okay, hop in the car, I'll show you where they are around the island. And then that was it. So back.
That was 2 to 3 months?
Yeah. And so during that time, Peace Corps has so a few things that they really hone in on and want us to focus on is, one, sustainability. So anything that we did over those 2 years, which sounded like a long time at the beginning, but just was a blink of an eye. So anything we did needed to have a component of sustainability so that we could think about when we're gone, because we're coming and going, how are the locals going to be able to, be impacted by what work I'm doing and continue some of that. So that was one. And then the other piece was they taught us how to really do thorough community mapping. And that was a skill that I found extremely valuable because I spent time just seeking out who and what organizations have anything to do with the elderly and the island, and really doing a needs assessment as well. Like what am I observing? What resources do they have? What resources can we draw upon? And who would be the partners in all of this? Who do I need to network with? So I really learned a lot about, what other organizations, either non-governmental or government organizations, were connected with Homes for the Aged. So those two pieces, the community mapping and that idea of sustainability, really helped guide my time there.
Let's go back really quick to, can you define what is a recreational therapist?
Sure. I thought you might ask that. So a recreational therapist essentially uses recreation as a modality to work on individual goals for people. So those goals may be around mental health, they may be around physical health, they may be socially motivated. So if I'll use an example. So if somebody's working on a physical goal, say they've had a spinal cord injury and they are learning to live with just using their upper body. So they would be learning how to use a wheelchair, learning how to transfer, strength building in upper body. A recreational therapist would come in and say, okay, let's learn how to do functional transfers, say from your wheelchair to a bi-ski or monoski or into the pool, or, something that would add to quality of life for someone and allow them to continue to be active in life. So I've worked with a lot of people with brain injuries, spinal cord injuries. I do a lot of outdoor recreation activities. So I teach adaptive skiing. I work with people with cognitive and intellectual disabilities in that capacity. So it might be looking at how do we shift our teaching strategies to be able to work with somebody who might have some processing issues, might not have the safety awareness due to, being on the autism spectrum. So it's considering the person and then looking at what their goals are, what their interests are, and finding ways to get them engaged in life through recreation and leisure. So
by the time you had your Peace Corps assignment, you already had that degree?
I had that degree and I'd been working for 2 years. So that was it 2 years? No, it would have been longer than that. It would have been 3 years I would have been working. So
how much of that did you end up doing in the island?
A lot, actually. Yeah. So what I found was there were a couple areas that I could start to hone in on that would be sustainable. One of them was the networking aspect. There were 9 different nursing homes on the island, and they all operated independently. Some were government run, some were nonprofit run by churches, but they were very, very different, and there was no standard of care throughout the different homes. So I found that by creating a networking group where the different, they call them matrons, but the directors of the homes would come together and have an opportunity to learn what the other homes were doing. That was one role that I played, was a connector and facilitated that. And then through that, we were able to find out what they needed, what was a commonality across the homes that they needed. And one of the needs was most of the staff, they called them caregivers, that worked at the homes only had an elementary school education. The educational system in Grenada was a British system. And so in order to get to secondary school, you had to pass an exam. And a lot of people couldn't pass that exam. And so if you don't pass the exam, you don't have an opportunity to go to high school or secondary school. So the caregivers were very, passionate about their role as caregivers, but they didn't have much education. So they were hungry for it. They wanted that training. They wanted more training. They wanted more education, and they wanted to be recognized for what they were doing. So I was able to get a grant, a USAID grant, and then also have a local match through the government to offer a training program for all of the caregivers across the island. And actually an additional island, Carriacou, one of the Grenadine Islands, had 2 nursing homes. So we had, can't remember the total number of participants in this training program, but it was a 2-week training program. And we had to stagger it. So we offered, I want to say 5 different 2-week programs so that we didn't take all of the caregivers from one of the homes at a time. So 2 would come from each home. They'd come as a pair from their home representing whichever home they were at, and come together with all the other home, 2 from each home. And then they would go through this training course together. So and the training course covered all sorts of things. We talked about transfers, keeping, proper body mechanics so they could stay safe. We talked about how to create programs at their homes that, tapped into what their residents were interested in, culture. We did some examples. We did programs. I'd pair up with a local orphanage that another Peace Corps volunteer was working at. And we ran a scavenger hunt that was based on bush medicine. So because a lot of the people in the homes, the nursing homes, had that knowledge of bush medicine, and the younger generation didn't. So we used it as an educational experience to teach the kids, an intergenerational experience to pair them up. And they did a scavenger hunt to identify different types of bush medicine. So yeah, we brought a lot of I did bring a lot of recreational programming in, but I also focused on other aspects as well.
So at the end of those 2 years, is it your responsibility to make sure, like, how do you make sure that whatever you did continues? It's your responsibility. It's you and the people you were working with. It's only the people in Grenada. Like, who takes care of these not going away?
Yeah. Well, that's up to the individual Peace Corps volunteer to create something, again, that is sustainable, that comes from the locals. A lot of times when people hear, when people sign up for the Peace Corps, they think, okay, here I am. I'm coming to save the world. I'm coming to give these people who don't have what we have in our country, my knowledge and my expertise. But it really needs to come from the local people. So for sustainability with the things that I was working on, some of the stuff I'm sure is not happening in it anymore. But the networking group, that's why that I felt was kind of a key piece, because it would engage the locals that were at that managerial leadership level, and hope that was something that was valuable enough to them to continue after I was gone. And I know that, I'm sure a lot of it comes down to the people, that are involved. So, here too, if you've got that champion, if you've got that person that's really passionate and really values something, then they will continue to make it happen and hopefully get enough people around them and keep the momentum going. But if you don't have those people anymore in the picture, then oftentimes things, fall by the wayside. And so hopefully, last I had heard, the networking group was still continuing, but it was really 2 of the matrons that were spearheading it. So once they retire, I don't know. Hopefully they see enough value that others will continue it. But yeah, there's nothing that we can really put into place where we say, okay, there's always going to be a Peace Corps volunteer continuing in my place to make sure that these things still happen. I will say, to answer, another example of helping that sustainability piece. David worked at the Ministry of Education, and when he came in, they saw he was a speech therapist, so they wanted him to do individual treatment with students, and he said, that's not sustainable. So he instead focused his work on helping put into place at the ministry an officer for the special education schools. So that was a way for him to help create a piece that would be sustainable beyond his service.
So it's not coming in and trying to solve specific issues with specific people. It's creating systems, having the buy-in from the people.
Got it.
And then, okay, 2 questions, one that has to do with the before and one that has to do with the after. So before, I'm very curious to find out why the Peace Corps doesn't know very clearly what your assignment will be. When, like, is that a lack of communication between them? Is that how the philosophy is there? Like, it doesn't have to be the specific, like, why that gap between what they thought you could do and what you ended up doing? And the second question regarding the after the program, do you get evaluated? Is there something at the end that gives information to Peace Corps about your 2 years and what needs to be done afterwards?
Yes. So to answer your first question, I think that in some cases, there's not a disconnect. In some cases, there's organizations. So local organizations need to request to have a Peace Corps volunteer. So some organizations have been doing that for years and years and years and know how they want to utilize that volunteer, what that means to have a Peace Corps volunteer. And then there's a lot of organizations that have no idea what the Peace Corps is and what a volunteer would bring to them. So it's up to the country director, who is usually a local person, to help educate local organizations on how they could utilize a Peace Corps volunteer. So in my experience, the Ministry of Social Services had never had a Peace Corps volunteer, so they didn't really know what it was all about. And so in this case, the country director knew how a Peace Corps volunteer could be valuable to them. But so she kind of used us a little bit. She said, okay, they're not requesting a volunteer, but I know it could be useful. So I'm going to shift this volunteer into this space based on what my individual resume looked like. So she may not have done that for somebody who was fresh out of college and didn't have any work experience, but she knew that there could be a possibility of success in putting somebody who had work experience into this role. So I think that it varies. Sometimes organizations know there's not a disconnect, but oftentimes, like, she didn't know who I was. She was just going off of my resume. So I think a lot of times, an individual gets there and they think they're going to be doing one thing because it seemed to match, but their skill set maybe is a little different and would be more useful in another capacity. And then the other question you had about evaluation. So all Peace Corps are required to do an exit interview when we're leaving. So there's an opportunity to share what worked, what didn't, what we hope continues, if we feel that our assignment would benefit from having another volunteer in it. So yeah, the exit interview was the opportunity and I don't really remember feeling like they were evaluating me. It was more an opportunity to share, just more about my experience and make recommendations.
Do you remember what didn't work?
Whoa, there's a lot that didn't work. I mean, so it didn't work that I was falling into this role of fixing printers. I mean, and they were happy. The ministry was happy to have me do that. It was a need, an immediate need. And it was really just like erasing the queue of like 50, people who had just kept sending jobs to the printers and jammed it up. That I realized I really needed to be very self-directed to figure out what it was that, where I could be most useful and not necessarily go on what they were asking me to do. Because again, they hadn't had a volunteer before, and I don't think they really knew what the potential was or how to utilize my skills. The other thing that for me really didn't work. So I grew up in New England, in Massachusetts. It's a very fast-paced society there. I mean, it's like, people show up to meetings on time. We, try to really be efficient with our time. And I was now in a culture that was island time. People slowed down. Nobody got to meetings on time. If it rained, pretty much it came to a standstill. People just found shelter. They weren't trying to continue to get to where they needed to be, rush, rush, rush. So for me, I really had to adjust my expectations and the speed at which I got things done. Everything takes longer there. People just weren't as, feeling as urgent about getting things done as I was feeling. And they didn't necessarily have that drive for productivity. I felt that I only had 2 years to get things done. So, I had to get it done. But I would show up to meetings and be the only one there for the first half hour. And then people would show up and then people would fall asleep, right in front of me. And I was just, so for me, that adjusting to a different type of culture and not taking offense to it. I was now in a culture where people came right out with talking about appearance. If I had a pimple, it would no doubt be pointed out to me multiple times that day. If I gained a little weight, that would be pointed out to me, so I had to kind of have a tougher skin and not take offense to things. So, yeah.
So now looking back, what are the skills? I mean, you mentioned one, the community mapping, but what are the skills or the life experiences that you took from those 2 years and ran with them in your professional and personal life once you came back?
Yeah, one of the things that really stood out to me was how resource rich our country is, yet how blind we can be to that. So I had worked previously at a residential school and a rehab facility, a physical rehab facility for people with brain injuries. And there, we always felt like we didn't have enough. We didn't have enough resources. But after my experience in Grenada, I realized, wow, it's really a matter of perspective. They really didn't have a lot of resources, yet we figured out ways to make things happen on limited resources. And back in the United States, we kind of were in this mode of, we need more, rather than stepping back and going, how do we do more with what we have? And not always feel that need for more. So that I definitely carried over into my work. And personal life too, for sure. I mean, I raising our kids, I feel like really one of our, foundations is not to get greedy and not to feel like you need to, have all these monetary resources. There's a lot of other resources if you just take a step back and take a moment to look at what those other resources are, and and how important things can be, beyond just the monetary piece of things. So yeah, and I think my kids, as a result, are pretty aware of, not always, asking for money to do things, or feeling like that's, they're entitled to that. They're pretty good at managing their own money and making it stretch. So
now, on a more personal level,
mhm.
your marriage, how did those 2 years make your marriage stronger? What happened? I mean, it's not, it's like a crash course on marriage and learning how to be together, but very different. So how did it help or not your marriage those 2 years?
Yeah, I love that question, because so we got married in March of 2001 and left for the Peace Corps in July of 2001. So that was, in a sense, our honeymoon. I mean, so to give you a little more information, to throw a little wrench in it, so I broke my back 2 weeks before our wedding.
Oh my goodness.
And so it was tricky, because so we actually withheld that information from the Peace Corps, because my back healed quickly. It healed within 8 weeks. I was very fortunate. I could still walk down the aisle. I had a back brace over my dress, but I was able to walk. I wasn't paralyzed. And my rehab, I was very diligent, and so it healed quickly. But we withheld that because at one point during the application process, I had disclosed that I had been to family therapy, when I was like 10 or something. And that triggered something in the process where they did an in-depth analysis of making sure I was mentally stable to go. So we had already kind of had that little hiccup, which really slowed things down. So we thought, okay, we're not going to say anything about the back. We're just going to make sure it heals, because they're not going to let us go. And we're on track to leave, a couple months after we get married. So it healed, we left. And I think that the whole Peace Corps experience really strengthened our marriage, because, we had been living together. So we knew, what the ins and outs of that. But I probably would have left the Peace Corps early if I hadn't been married. It was really, really important to have that support. And I saw a lot of other Peace Corps in our group, volunteers, that left early because, they just didn't have that support that David and I had as a married couple. It is there's a lot of challenges. The Eastern Caribbean has a 50% early release rate, where people leave before they complete their 2 years. That's due to medical issues. Most of the older volunteers in the Peace Corps get placed in the Eastern Caribbean because it's easiest to seek medical attention if needed. It's a quick, easy flight back to the US. So some people left for medical issues. There was a high rate of abuse. So a lot of female volunteers left early. It's a culture where, there's catcalling all the time. There's, just outward. I mean, here in this country, I just can't believe what upsets people compared to what we kind of had to endure there. So, I think my tolerance level for that harassment is probably higher than some people, but harassment, a lot of people leave for that. I couldn't stand the heat. For me, it was, I'm a cold weather person, so it was really, really hard to function in just a dry and wet season, but hot year round. A lot of people, the isolation gets to them. So for my relationship, for our marriage, it was really, it strengthened our marriage. I feel like we were really able to step up and support each other. And I think we did more than other volunteers in terms of our service because we had each other to bounce ideas off of. And that's big. It's hard to navigate a really loose professional path. And so a lot of Peace Corps volunteers felt like they weren't getting anywhere in their service and what they were supposed to be doing. So they left early. They felt like it was, not a good use of their time. But for David and I, we were able to reassess constantly and say, okay, I think that might make sense to go this direction. And so we constantly had that support for each other. So I think it was a strengthener for our relationship.
And it's interesting how concerned was the Peace Corps regarding your mental health, the volunteers, but it doesn't seem, at least at that point, they didn't seem to have a space and people to take care of your mental health, of all the volunteers in place in the country. Like, it sounds like that was needed.
Yeah.
So that the changing people and volunteers leaving didn't happen that often. They needed some kind of support.
And I think that's probably why during the application process, they were so keyed into if people have mental health issues, because there wasn't that support built in there. I mean, you had a team of administrators of the Peace Corps through the Peace Corps that, you could talk to, but it wasn't at all geared towards counseling or support or therapy. I'm wondering though, that may have changed with everything going virtual. Now
Hopefully.
there would be, a lot more access to those support services, which we didn't have at that time. So, and it would be really great if they had more of that built in, because I think that is common amongst Peace Corps volunteers, especially people who are placed in, more remote and isolated places. Mental health is a big issue. So but at the time there wasn't really anything. There was a local doctor, but she didn't really address mental health. Things have really changed a lot since 2001. As I'm talking, I'm realizing just in the mental health field, especially.
Nowadays, I guess you could just reach someone through Zoom. On your computer, like a video call with someone and said, I'm going crazy with this placement. I don't know what to do. Or communicate better or faster with more people in Peace Corps. Okay, so it was good for your marriage. You had 3 kids. Do any of them, or have any of them, or are any of them considering doing the Peace Corps in the future?
Well, I haven't heard any of them talk about it yet. I didn't really know much about the Peace Corps when I was their age. I mean, they do because we did it, but we are actually taking the whole family to Grenada later this month. And the only one of our 3 kids that's been is Eli. He's 17 now. He went at 6 months old and a year and a half old. So he doesn't remember it. And the other 2, Isaac and Sadie, have never had the opportunity to go. So this may be a trip that gets them thinking a little bit more. We're having a reunion there with the other volunteers that we were there with. A number of them will be there at the same time with their families. So I think that they're going to get a real inside look at, what we were doing there, what an example of what Peace Corps service looks like. And I wouldn't be surprised if if one of them did decide to go that route. It is limiting, or not limiting, but there are windows of time in your life when you can serve, and there's times when you can't. If you have any dependents, you cannot serve. So it had to be before we had kids or after our kids are independent. So yeah, that kind of dictates a little bit, when you're doing it. So you don't find a lot of Peace Corps volunteers in their, 30s and 40s, unless they've chosen not to have kids or a family.
Would you like that for them? Would you like one of them to have that experience, or is just, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it's okay with you? And
I mean, it would be exciting. I haven't really thought about that, though. I kind of feel like they'll find their path, and whether it be traveling and exploring different countries, or doing it through service. I do know that when we were there, that was when I was first introduced to what a gap year was. I had never heard of a gap year, and we met a number of people from other countries, not the United States or Grenada, but doing gap years, Canada, England. There are people from places that I think gap years were, more supported. And so I learned about a gap year, and that now is something that I would really encourage all my kids to do. So they may end up in some sort of service during a gap year.
Define what gap year is.
So a gap year is the time between when you graduate high school and if you've chosen to go on to college. So oftentimes people will apply to college right out of high school and then defer for a year and spend that year either doing volunteer work or traveling or just working in their hometown and getting work experience, but in a sense, taking a break from academics before, and really helping explore who you are, and maybe doing more experiential learning, so that then the idea is when you go back to the classroom and to get a degree, you just have more perspective on life. And I think I was young when I graduated high school. I was 17. I was, a mediocre student, and I went right on to college, and I was a mediocre student there too. And I didn't, I just needed more life experience. And I think I would have benefited from college if I had done a gap year in between. Yeah. So, so that's different than the Peace Corps. You actually can't apply to the Peace Corps unless you have a 4-year degree. So you couldn't do Peace Corps as a gap year, but there's plenty of other things. There's AmeriCorps, there's, it's that same idea of learning about other people, other cultures, gaining a perspective on life, learning about yourself, not necessarily just sitting in a classroom and turning in assignments and listening to lectures. So,
very nice. It sounds like a very good idea. It's time for us to switch now, because I have to let you go in a few minutes. When was a moment in your life when you decided that saying no was a much better decision?
Yeah, that was a hard one for me to think about, because I was, I don't think I say no a lot. I think I say yes more than no. But when we've moved around a lot, and we had just moved to Ithaca in 2017. We had moved here for David's job at Ithaca College. So I was a trailing spouse, which, for me, it was exciting because I enjoy change. I have a lot of different interests. I have a very wide skill set. I've had, over 30 jobs in my life. So I was excited to kind of explore what some other possibilities were going to be professionally for me. And one of the things that has really served me well is volunteering for different things in my community. That has really connected me and led to work opportunities. So when we moved here in 2017, I was excited to get back into skiing. We had moved from Ohio where there was no ski areas near me. And skiing for me wasn't just recreational, it was professional as well, because I teach adaptive skiing for people with disabilities. And so Greek Peak is our little local mountain. So I got involved quickly with their adaptive ski program, and I was volunteering with them. And then they quickly realized that I was a recreational therapist, and I had developed and founded an accessible recreation program in New Hampshire. And so the current director of the program was ready to retire. So they were looking to hire a new director, and they really were trying to get me into that position. They were asking me if I would take that role on, and I had to really dig deep and figure out if that was the right move for me. I mean, I had the experience, I had the skill set, but I also knew how draining that is when you're in recreation as a profession. A lot of your time is evenings and weekends, and I have 3 children. And so maintaining that work-life balance is hard when you're working, when everybody else is off. And it was also a role that I know. So it's seasonal work, and seasonal work is intense because when you're in season, it takes it all away from you. And then, you're out of season and it's like done. And then you're recovering. And in my case, I'm into the next season, which is usually water sports or biking is what I'm currently teaching. But so I was tempted to take that job, but I had to say no when I really evaluated if it would allow me to maintain that work-life balance. And so it was hard. It was hard to say no because I knew the program needed a strong leader. And so I continued to volunteer with the program. And they've been in flux with leadership, and they had somebody who didn't have any experience, had the time to give, but not really the leadership skills and experience. And so, it was hard for me to know that my no answer, resulted in maybe not the strongest programming, but that's life. You really do have to I guess, answer based on your own needs and your own family's needs. And so, yeah, in this case, I had to not really focus as much on what the program needed, but more what I needed.
Now I need to go back a little bit because I'm so curious. You mentioned you've had around 30 jobs in your career, and that for our generation it's still not the case. It's more common nowadays that kids think of not being in the same company for years, that they switch jobs. So what made you have so many different jobs? Why did that happen to you? And the second question is, did you make sure you left systems in place for the things you did in those 30 places?
Yeah, oh gosh. Well, some of the jobs were, when I was young, it was things like, getting my water safety instructor and teaching swim lessons or lifeguarding. And so in those cases, I didn't really need to think about sustainability. But so what happened? Why did I have so many jobs? I think one thing that happened is I realized that my strongest style of learning was experiential. For me, working and creating systems and, taking ideas and building them and developing them into something that filled a need in the community. I was really driven by that and really good at that. And I didn't know anything about what experiential learning was until I got to college and found the field of recreational therapy and saw that, wow, okay, now this is tapping into my strengths. I was always an athlete and a physical person and a creative person, but I didn't realize how much learning can happen in those environments. I thought education and learning was just in the classroom. So for me, I think I was doing that by taking on different jobs and embracing change and exploring different areas. And I started to realize how much I learned from each of my jobs, whether it be how to interact with people, how to get along with somebody that maybe we really butted heads, but and I just started realizing, wow, every job I'm like learning something either about myself or something that I can take and bring to another position, or hard skills on, whitewater kayaking, or how to adapt a climbing wall for somebody who is blind, or, so it was like just super valuable for me in my professional life, in my work life, to be learning from those jobs. So I think that's probably what added. And a lot of the jobs were concurrent for me. Like I didn't go one full-time job to another full-time job. I right now work 3 jobs. And so, yeah, so that's worked for me because it creates flexibility for me, for my family. And it allows me to, keep my hands in a few different things. So
going back to the no, and we have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
So going back to the no, you said no to the opportunity at Greek Peak. What was your next yes after that? So what was the thing that you were looking for that you said, this is the right fit?
Well, right now, so I was also working, so I was volunteering there, and I was working as an after-school counselor at Fall Creek Elementary because my kids were there, and the waiting list was so long that the only way I could get them in was to become a counselor. So I kind of worked the systems a little bit, and really, like, my focus right now, my primary focus is my family. So I said yes to the after school program, but that's not a professional job. I didn't need my master's degree for that, but it made sense for me family wise. So I said yes to that. I said yes to, I work at Bike Walk Tompkins, which is a local nonprofit organization.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I said yes to a contractor position there, where I am developing their education program. We're working on getting bike education into all the elementary and middle schools. I also teach adults how to bike ride, either coming back from not riding for years. And I kind of bring my skill set where I can look and say, okay, we have options for adaptive equipment if somebody has balance issues and just doesn't want to risk riding 2 wheels. We could get them into a bike that makes sense for them and their lifestyle and their goals. So I said yes to Bike Walk Tompkins, and I also said yes to an organization called Open the Lid, which teaches online classes for people with neurodiversity. And so they're people who may be on the autism spectrum, have Down syndrome, have mental health challenges, and we come together as a community online, and I teach a class once a week where we work on social skills through a dance party. So I've said yes to a lot more than I've said no to, but
that's why it was so hard for you to come up with your no.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Very interesting. Before we finish, I'm very curious to find out, what is the system that you are creating within your family that you hope stays in place once your kids go out into the world?
Ooh, gosh, let me think about that. This system, what comes to the forefront of my mind when you talk about that, and I don't know if it's a system, but it's more of a parenting approach that I adopted very early. I mean, it was before I even had 3 kids. It was Eli was 3 and we were about to have Isaac. And something switched to me where I realized that one of the best things I could do for my kids is allow them independence at an early age and appropriate to their age, but more independence than I might be comfortable with. As a parent, we tend to, as parents, want to hover over our kids and do for our kids and keep them safe and not see them struggle. And so I consciously, as my kids grow and enter different phases of their life, try to be aware of giving them, putting a lot more responsibility on their plates, and having them take that independence and those, even little opportunities to make the decision on their own, wear whatever. I've never dressed my kids because I let go of that. I'm like, I can't have those battles. And I want them to have that opportunity to find who they are and create their own person. So I think the system of really giving autonomy and ownership and independence to my kids has been, at the forefront, and creating opportunities, for themselves, and taking advantage of those opportunities, recognizing when there's opportunities, and not being afraid to really diversify their interests, not focus on one sport, but try every activity that you can, so that when you're no longer in a position to be playing, high school sports, you'll have skills in all these other, and interest levels in all these other places. So really diversifying their interests and skills.
What about the community mapping? Did you teach them, or have you taught them that? That is kind of also very valuable, especially when you're a teenager, I guess.
Yeah. I don't think officially I've really thought about, having them explore, but I think that they do it just through like what we're encouraging. So one of my kids, when he didn't make the soccer team, he had to step back and go, what else is available to me? What are other opportunities I can see? And he ended up running for vice president of his class. He played unified soccer, which is a Special Olympics division of sports where athletes with and without disabilities play together and support each other. He ended up doing an a cappella singing group. So I think organically it's happening. I'm not like, okay, time to community map. Let's look at what are all the opportunities out there? What are all the possible networks? But I think that they are doing that. All three of them find work opportunities within our neighborhood for mowing lawns or babysitting. So I think that they get it. So I must be working on it subconsciously.
You should feel very proud. Molly, it's time for me to let you go. Thank you so much for having come to What If I Say Yes. Please send me pictures, images, whatever you would like to share with the audience regarding your yes or your yeses and your no. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Oh, same. Thank you for doing this. This is a wonderful platform to share people's stories. I enjoyed listening to other people's stories, and I hope that you are able to continue. So congratulations on a wonderful, wonderful website and blog. Take care.
Thank you, Molly. Yes.
Thank you for having me. Bye.